Shabbos, everybody, beautiful, well done. Some filler music, some Kavanah music. Okay, first of all, welcome everybody. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We're happy you're here. We have one new person with us.
You're forgiven.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
You want to introduce yourself, maybe the Hebrew here?
Sure. My name's Katie. We're here on vacation. Our Airbnb is on this block, and
Nice.
I was so excited when I'm looking at the Google map. I was like, oh, well, I have to come. I would have rather have come for services. I don't normally do tourist study, I have to say. So so.
We have services right after.
Yeah, we kind of have plans.
No,
So,
but
there's
you
only,
are
yeah.
Vacation. I got it. Sure.
But no, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
From Tampa.
From Tampa, yes, sorry, I left that out, yeah, and
Okay.
I belong to a small synagogue in Tampa, 200 member families, so, yeah, I don't,
Welcome.
thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to those online. I'm looking at the gallery view to see who's here with us, the Shabbos. All right, Chaverim. A good group, all on one screen. One screen. All right. Looking up and down. We know that you're much bigger than the square that you're in. We know. You guys are bigger than that, much bigger. So good to see you all. We have matzah napkins here in Romemu for some reason. There are matzah napkins. You see that? You guys, amazing. So just this week, somebody sent me. I think someone in my family, my wife's family, sent a video of some comedian who was comparing. He's Italian. He's saying Jews and Italians were so similar. You see that one where he says except the little thing, he said, I went to this Passover dinner. I went to a Passover dinner, and I'm thinking I'm going to Passover dinner. I'm starving. He says, I'm starving. And then all of a sudden, I sit down at the table, so, I'm there, my first time at a Passover dinner. And then they start handing out reading material. That's what he said. They start handing out reading material. And then, he said, I'm Italian. First 15 minutes, if you don't have bread on the table, I'm done. He said, here, you little matzah. Got some matzah here for those of you who have Jewish Italian souls. In the 17th century, the 18th century, there was actually a prevalent idea that there were three groups of souls. There were Ashkenazim, more Eastern European or European souls, and then there were Sephardic souls, and then there was actually one opinion that said there were Italian souls. Like what? Okay, Italian souls.
Right.
I know. Who knows?
There's a special right.
Yeah, because
they
Columbus. I don't know.
got together and formed Rome.
I don't even know exactly. I don't know. Jewish souls, Italian souls, people. People. All right. The ganze mishpacha, the human family, many soul families. Okay, so let's make the blessings on Torah this morning, and then we're going to learn a little bit of Torah. So, Gil, thank you so much coming to us live from Israel, which is pretty amazing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Okay, let's learn. Aren't Italian Jews their own classification? Yes, maybe they are. I mean, in terms of historically, maybe. Mystically, I don't know. I'm not sure about this, souls are souls, but who knows? All right, so we're going to learn a little Torah today and see where we go. I want to never-ending battle here for this. Someone reset the TV settings, so I can't get up onto the. Frustrating. There you go. Okay, I can do that. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit this morning about this thing called Nazirut. We've talked about it in the shul before, and it's a personal favorite of mine. And where it comes in the Torah also, we'll talk about it in terms of the parsha itself. But can people see it? That's pretty big, right? Yeah, you're seeing it? Okay, okay. Sources, I didn't number the sources, I forgot, so just bear with me. So source 1. So Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, speak el Bnei Israel, daber el Bnei Israel. V'amarta alehem, and say to them, ish o isha, man or woman, ki yafli lindor neder, whether, that they are yafli, a very funny phrase, explicitly, explicitly makes a vow that is a neder nazir. The word nazir, which is interesting where it comes from. Nezer is a crown, so it's a crown. Some kind of vow of connected to abstinence, clearly. Lahazir also is to set themselves apart. So it's an interesting play on the word crowning and also setting apart. And it's called a neder nazir. Now you guys all know the word neder, N-E-D-E-R, right? Or right in Hebrew it's nun daled resh. We know it from kol nidrei v'yasareh, right? We know that from the most famous Jewish prayer, which isn't even a prayer. So neder is a vow. And this part of the Torah, this part of this week's Torah portion is dealing with vows. The general context of promises and relational promises. And so this person has become what is known as a Nazir, Lahazir Ladonai, to become set apart for Adonai, for Hashem, for Spirit. And then the Torah immediately makes explicit mention of what that means. Miyayin v'shechar yazir, from wine and from any intoxicant. Usually shechar is understood later on as beer, something that is like an intoxicant. Chometz yayin, chomer v'chometz shechar lo yishtet. It's almost also any vinegar of wine or vinegar, right? Anything that is fermented can't be drunk. V'chom mishrat anavim lo yishtet, and also anything that comes from grapes. Mishrat is a steeping of grapes, right? So grape juice or anything like that. Anavim lachim ve'ishim lo yichal, and no raisins, no wet grapes, no dry grapes. In other words, no grapes, right? This is a classic example of what's called like a cloud, where there is a general principle, and then it goes into various details, and it comes back to the general principle. This is kind of like when the rabbis come along to understand Torah, they learn from like this kind of example where God could have said something in a very explicit way, and one kind of, let me make it explicitly clear, but then, right, it could have been simpler just to say anything that's intoxicating, don't drink. But no drinking. Kol Yemei Nizro, we're in verse 4. All the days of the Nizirut, of being a Nezer, Mikol Asher Yaseh Migefen Hayayin Mechartzanim Mi'adzag Lo Yochel. Right, this is the klal, coming back to the general principle. All the days of the vow, this person may not eat anything from the grape, no seeds or skin. Right? And then it goes on, verse 5 rather. Kol Yemei Neder Nizro, in all the days of the neder, or the vow of Nizirut, Ta'ar Lo Yavar Rosho. There can't be a razor, can't touch his head, right, or their head. Ad Melot Yamim Asher Yazil Adonai Kadosh Yeh, until the fulfillment, until the filling out of the days that have been specified, right? This person is considered to be Kodesh or Kadosh Yeh, holy. Gadel Peras Arosho, let this person's hair, right, be left and untrimmed. Kol Yemei Haziro Ladonai Al Nevish Meit Lo Yavo, also another, right, prohibition. We can't come into contact with anybody who has died. And then we look at that's okay. So we'll stop there for a second, okay? Right, this is the second piece. These verses in 13 through 18 are basically what happens at the end of the Nizirut. Okay, so let's go over this together. We can look outside, you can look at me, you can look at someone else. Let's just go over this for a second. Okay, so what's the basic structure of the Neder Nazir? Give me some of the basic features. So number one, what is it?
Vow.
It's a vow. So what does that mean exactly? So let's unpack vow. What does that mean? So give me an example. A person says, I'm going to become a Nazir.
You make a promise to yourself of certain values or behaviors and try to create a parameter of what that includes.
Right.
And doesn't include.
Right. So
But
here.
it also has a consequence if you don't do it. That's the difference between a promise and a vow.
Right. So the vow here has actually, it has substance. It has, right, it's solid. It's something, any vow in the Torah is not just, well, there are different kinds of oral statements. There are some that are called shvuot. There are lots of ways to imagine it. But let's just say the general category is that you commit either to abstain from something or to do something. I'm either going to do something or I won't do something. In this case, you don't do something, right? This is all about what's not being done. And in the context of the neder, in context of the vow, it's how long is it? Like, does it have? It has a certain period, it has a duration, because you know that because in the very next verses, right, it begins at a certain time and it'll end at a certain time. In fact, even the verse that said until the fulfillment of the days of that vow. So it has a certain specific amount of time. Like I'm going to be a Nazir for 30 days.
This is not for women, right?
No, it's for women too.
Oh, it's for women too?
It's for women too. Right there it says Ish o Isha.
Oh.
Right, Ish o Isha.
Oh,
If
that's
you're
right.
interested, Nikki, we have a whole Nazarite home kit.
Oh, thank you.
It was produced. It's mass produced, just like the vaccine, and anybody can do it. And it's
That's
I
right.
met
It
I
says
met
man
some
or
kids a
woman.
couple of weeks ago who were getting venture funding for home manicure and pedicures. Said it's very that's the next thing. So you won't have to venture funding. Good idea, right? Anyway, so you can have a home Nazarite kit. So 30 days a year. Now, whatever it is, there are very clear restrictions. What are the restrictions? Let's just say them outside, and then we'll let go of them, just so you know it. In case somebody tests you, you never know. You're walking on the street here in New York, someone says, hey, do you happen to know what a Nazarite is? And okay, yeah. So what do you do? What's a Nazarite? So prohibition of abstaining from?
All forms of the fruit of the vine.
Right, anything intoxicating, right? And also, like even more so, like anything intoxicating and then anything that comes from a grape. Right? No, nothing from the grape and nothing else that is fermented. No vinegar, nothing. Okay, that's first prohibition. The general category of, right, grapes and any intoxicant. With grapes, it's not just an intoxicant. You can't touch a grape, right? It's like really extreme. Okay, what's the second thing?
Can't cut your hair.
Can't cut your hair, right? No haircut. Almost like a sannyasin. You might find somebody. This sounds very much like a sidhu or somebody roaming the streets of Calcutta or something, right? This is very much. Like the notion that hair.
I don't get this thing about hair.
Okay, let's go there for a second. Let's not go there yet. Let's hold off for a second. The meaning behind some of these things. What else? What's the third thing?
No contact with the dead.
No contact with the dead. Now, we're gonna open it up now for a second because otherwise I think that the chat area might go crazy. So just open up and so I can hear some voices. Let's talk about some of these things, and we'll come in around the Nazarite vow, right? Some of the things that might come up around these three prohibitions, what the Nazarite might mean for a second. If anybody wants to say anything, feel free to raise a hand. Otherwise, we're going to go into looking at what the meaning of it might be in some of these elements. Go ahead, Jay.
I
Can't hear you. Lost you, brother.
Yeah, the unmuting is a little kludgy. I never realized this before, but kol yemei, which is translated as term in the English that you have, but it certainly indicates that this is something that could be time limited, that one can opt in and out of, etc. And I didn't realize that. Could you speak to that a bit?
No, you said it very well. I mean, the Mishnah, in the rabbinic understanding of these verses, there is a very attuned sense that this might be, that it often is a very limited amount of time. There is another category called a Nazir was like a Samson Nazarite, like the Haftorah for this parsha is always that deals with Samson, right? Mm-hmm. Right, Samson and Delilah. So Samson and God bless you. And Tom Jones, they are basically, Samson was a Nazir from the moment he was born, from before he was born, from what's called Mibeten, from the belly. And so, yeah, this was always seen as a period. Now, how long the period is, it could be, there was a modern day Nazir named David HaKohen, who was both a Kohen, he was also a priest, and he was also a Nazir, and he was a student of Rav Kook's, the first chief rabbi of Palestine, and he was called a Nazir. And so Rav David Cohen became a Nazirite when he was a young man and died a Nazir, right? He took it on as a lifetime practice. Now, this is clearly a very time-bound practice, and you can pick it up and put it down. Apparently, it was like something you could be a Nazir for a month, and then come to the temple and do the kind of the completion of the ceremony that completes this period of Nizirut. Yeah, Daniel.
Shabbat shalom. Two things. First, when you mentioned what characterizes a vow, I think there is one component missing, which is it's not unilateral. I mean, it's between a person and something and somebody else. Though when you ask for examples, to me, what came to mind was obviously a wedding or marriage vow. And there you could have an example of the two situations, right? So it is valid until it ends, but it can either end at the predefined time or when the parties involved decide so.
Right. So the vow is often, so in the context of this, Nizirut is between yourself and God, and there are many, right? There are a whole category of vows that are between you and God, and there are vows that are between humans, and right. When a vow is taken, it's a significant thing, right? Kol Nidre is so, I think Kol Nidre is so profoundly important because, for all kinds of reasons, but because ultimately the promises we make and the promises that we make and don't keep, for whatever reasons, are a vital part of the Jewish worldview. Like when we speak, the world comes into being, just as when God spoke and the world came into being. And so to speak is to conjure reality in our tradition. And so when one makes a vow, it's very important that one either fulfills it or has a really a sacred way of absolving oneself for whatever reasons or ending it appropriately at the appropriate time. Okay, so we're gonna move. I want to take one more comment, and then we're gonna move into. I want to stay close to the text and see, and kind of see what's happening in the text. Go ahead, Asher Chaim.
Thank you, Rav. I met a man who, during the Vietnam draft, decided that the army was for wusses. He was going to join the Marines. It didn't end well. The Nazir strikes me as someone who not only wants to be like the Kohen in avoiding presence of death and not drinking while on duty, but he says, being an ordinary Kohen is for wimps. I'm not even going to eat grapes. I'm going to be holier than the Pope. And it may be a necessary corrective for him to practice or for her to practice for a limited time. But this is clearly not the ideal of the Torah.
Well,
and
let's hold that for a second. Let's hold that thought for a second, okay? Because that's an interesting question, whether or not it is the ideal or not. But certainly, you're drawing us to the next verses, so to the next sources. Let's look at the comparison between this and the Kohen, and how interesting it is on some level that not everything in here, but some of it certainly is reminiscent of a Kohen, for sure, of a priest, right? So certainly in the source that's in front of you where it says Leviticus 10:9, which should be source 3, but I didn't put the sources there, right? We know from the story of back in Leviticus and Vayikra, after Nadav and Avihu, right, that story of the two sons of Aaron, that immediately the Torah tells us, Yain v'shechar lo al tesht, ata uvanecha itach, right? Wine and beer or other intoxicant do not drink, you and your sons, when you come into the oil and wait, when you come into the sacred sanctuary, v'lo tamutu, so that you don't die, right? Chukat olam l'dor techem. There's something about, again, like avoiding entirely, whether or not, why and so on, but like there's something about the priest that is now prohibited from having an intoxicant, okay? And then this source number 4, which is really for all of the Israelites, Lo takifu ba'ad roshchem v'lo tashchit et ad zekanecha, that's for all Jews, right? That's in the holiness code. That's where peyot, right, come from, not to cut your payas, the corners of your head. In other words, there's something extreme here, right? But there's something that Asher Chaim pointed to, which is a desire to be, on a higher level, let's say, of Kedusha, of holiness, and taking as a model the Kohanim. And certainly in source number 5, the very next source, in Leviticus 21, that is the commandment, the prohibition for the Kohanim, of the priests, not to come into contact with death. So, so almost every part of this is as you said, Asher Chaim, a kind of longing to be held to a higher standard. Now, but the question, of course, is whether or not this periodic abstinence or this the self-accepted or the self-initiated period of abstinence is like our marine friend. Is it a good thing or is it not? And what's its purpose? So let's look at source number. It doesn't have a number. It says Guide for the Perplexed. Morin Nebuchim. You see that? That's the Rambam, Maimonides. So everybody, where's Maimonides? He lives in Spain. He lives in Spain before he moves to Egypt. Nice. What century?
1100s.
Exactly. So the 12th century, dies in the beginning of the 13th century, 1204, 1135 to 1204. Nice. Wendy.
Spent some time in Morocco too, I thought.
A little bit in Morocco, it's true. He moved around. So the great Maimonides, right? Moshe ben Maimon. Taman Nizirut Mufu'ar Me'od says the object of Nazaritism, interesting translation, of being Nazarite, is very obvious, he says. Right? For him. He says keeping away from intoxicants has ruined many people. That maybe no truer statement has ever been made on some level. I mean, but one can speak about this, right? Of course, not only wine, we could, the material world in general is not the easiest place to navigate. And the Buddha was right about that. We become attached to things that are pleasurable, and certainly having a little bit of wine was a pleasurable moment. Okay, but it's also, right, there can be a strong inclination for it, right? He said in the law about Nazarite, we notice even the prohibition not even to touch the vine tree. That's what Asher Chaim said. Like Asher Chaim said it of the marine, but really it's the Torah. Right? The Torah is already setting up the Nazarite to be extreme in their approach to this prohibited substance. Right? It would seem that the Torah begins, like even the verses fall over themselves. The beginning of the Torah is like, don't drink wine. And then it's like, okay, but nothing intoxicating, no vinegar. And then it moves into, right, no wet grapes, no dry grapes. And then it finally ends up, it's like, you know what? Don't even touch the vine. So it's almost like the Torah itself was extreme in its rollout. So he says, yeah, there's a reason for that. He says it is right. This additional precaution implies that the lesson that humans must take of wine only as much as is absolutely necessary. For the person who abstains from drinking is called kadosh. Their sanctity is equal to the high priest. Right? They're not allowed to even to defy themselves to the right. They can't touch the dead body, even of their mother, their father. Right? They become almost so. In the Rambam's formulation, the Nazarite is the institution of the Nazarite is an extreme expression in response to a very difficult addiction, like to a very profoundly seductive quality that exists in wine. And the Rambam sees in here this abstinence, this asceticism, as a stepping stone, like a stepping stone to holiness, right? Becomes even the high priest, right? So if you look for a second, the Rambam, it would seem here, is advocating for a kind of extreme posture vis-a-vis the world, which of course anybody who knows the Rambam, Maimonides is not an extreme philosopher. He believed in the middle way. He believed in things being in the center. So is he advocating here for something extreme? If you look at this source from the Sforno says no. The Sforno says that even though it seems that wine is inviting a kind of self-denial that is extreme, it's only with wine, right? The Sforno writes, right? Lo yisageh atzmo b'tzom. He says that you should not be fasting. If you look at the source, sorry, where is it? It's kind of, I guess you have to turn the page, so I guess it would be on side 4, on the top of the page, yeah? And you can look up also on the screen, that's where it is. So he says, no, don't flagellate yourself, don't practice fasting, only abstain from wine and intoxicating liquids. This is almost like an early 12-step program. The former methods of self-denial would result in a diminished ability to serve God with all of one's faculties. Flagellation, a common practice among certain types of monks and holy men, is not allowed, right? Right, but being somebody who is a teetotaler, I don't even know, teetotaler, does reduce the urge to let oneself go and engage in demeaning activities due to drunkenness. So in other words, he's saying that the Torah has an insight here into the nature of this particular abstinence, right? And says that essentially that it's okay to be extreme when it comes to this particular substance, because substances are extremely powerful and addictive. So it's almost like the Rambam is allowing this as a path towards holiness. Now, what's also true is, and this is something that Asher Chaim, you know this too, that it's not so simple, because there is a tradition that says that at the end, right, if you look at the verses, which we didn't read, if you want to look at the verses that describe the ritual that ends the period of abstinence, the Nazarite is required to bring a sacrifice that is called a sin sacrifice, or a sin offering, a chatas. So that has been at the core of this question of Asher Chaim's essentially laying it down the middle, which is he a sinner or is he a saint? Now, it would seem from reading Maimonides that this is a sanctioned, Torahitically sanctioned way for a person to achieve a certain level of holiness. It seems that it's odd, because the formulation is that, wine is a dangerous thing, or wine can become an intoxicant. It's not exactly cast as, this is a way to holiness, although the Rambam says that. But there are opinions that say that the reason that the Nazir brings a sacrifice that is a sin offering is, as Asher Chaim said, that this is not the Torah's way. The Torah says that you should enjoy this world, and that there's even a midrash that says that God will take us to task at the end of days for every pleasurable thing that we saw and that we didn't enjoy. And so the rabbis say the reason why the Nazarite brings a sin offering is because even if the Nazarite vow or abstinence was upaya, was skillful means, it really cuts at a 90-degree angle to the Torah's embrace of this world and the pleasures of this world, and seeing them as divine blessing, right? We're born not with original sin, but with original blessing. And the world, the Garden of Eden and so on, that myth speaks to the beauty of this world. And so there is that camp that says that when you became a Nazarite, you might have needed to do it, but at least bring a korban chatas. At least acknowledge that your period of abstinence was, for that period, might have been necessary, but it was a public expression of an antithetical idea to what Torah believes in, which is the world is a good place. That 100-year-old Bordeaux, kishmak, it's great. But there's a whole other school of thought that says that the reason why you bring the chatas is exactly the opposite, which is because you ended your Nazarite period. So we look at this source here. It's a very famous source. It's from Nachmanides. Sounds like Maimonides, but with an N. Nachmanides is the son of Nachman, not the son of Maimon. Let's get a little. Where is Nachmanides living? At what period of time? Anybody? He's in Spain, also. Exactly. And when?
Later on.
A little later than Maimonides. A little bit later, like the next century.
Years later.
So we're talking about the 1200s and then the 14th century, a little like 1200. So look at the Nachmanides. Tam Hachatas says the reason that the Nazarite brings, why she brings a sin offering, the Yom Melos Yimei Nazarah, at the end of the fulfillment of the days, as Jay pointed out, at the end of that period. Lo nitparesh, it's not explained in the Torah. Al derech hapshat ki haish hazeh chotei nafsho b'mlos hanizirus ki hu ata nazir mikdushaso v'avodas Hashem. And ve'haya ra'ui haya lo she'yazir li'olam. He says it is not explained, but the most simple explanation is that this person sins against their soul on the day of completing their Nazaritehood, because until now they were separated in sanctity and the service of God. And they should therefore have remained separated forever, continuing all of their life consecrated and sanctified to God. As it's written in Amos, right? I will lift up from amongst your sons prophets and Nazarites among your young people, right? So the Ramban famously here, right? And this is kind of, this might be seen as an ascetic school, right? The ascetic school of Judaism, right? Not the middle path, but those who see kind of a monastic life as a kind of ideal, right? That, would that you stayed a nun. What do you do with Maria? I mean, come on, she says, a nun. She's like, what do you mean? I'm supposed to sing. She says, no, you have to bring a chatas for becoming the head of the Von Trapp family singers. Okay, so I just want to go back to one contemporary source, and then I'm going to open up for comments on this. We're going to have a poll at the end of this class to see where people are according to their, typology. Are you someone in favor of Nazarite? Were you one that wishes that you had been a Nazarite? If I was a Nazarite, but look at this, right here. Look at this source. This is an amazing thing. It's really apropos today being Pride Shabbat. This was written in the aftermath of the Orlando shooting.
Oh, wow.
Right? And Hashem should bring comfort and remembrance to those souls who were murdered that horrific night. And the Shabbos after that horrific terrorist attack, that hatred spilling over, was the Shabbos of Nassau. It's this week's Parsha, and it was impossible to imagine, reading the priestly blessing in the aftermath of what took place in the Pulse nightclub. And this Dvar Torah was given by Ruchi Rubinstein, and she wrote, some of the traditional commentators posit that people took this vow because they had previously indulged to excess, and that the vow helped restrain those impulses. And her father, Rabbi Jonathan Rubinstein, posits that the Nazarite vow may have functioned like a 12-step program, which is to say that people didn't make vows of abstinence in order to become a Nazir, right? But rather people might have become Nazirim in order to have a structure for abstinence, right? Which is essentially, right, a little bit of what the Rambam was saying, slightly. The Rambam seemed to be saying that both things. He seemed to be saying that in general people have a hard time abstaining from wine, but also those who are able to abstain more broadly can achieve a higher level of holiness in the world. He seems to combine both of those. But Rabbi Rubinstein, both of them, father and daughter, seem to be saying this here. And then I think Ruchi goes on, I should have brought the whole sermon, but she goes on to talk about the distortion that takes place in the Nazarite vow, that is not one that is taken, in order to abstain, but one that is from birth. And she said that in the Samson Haftorah, in the story in the Bible about Samson, which again always accompanies Nassau, that the Abar Benel, another great Spanish commentator, says that the reason why Samson was a Nazarite from the belly was that he had to be indoctrinated from a very early stage, to hate the Philistines, whom he was going to wage war against. And she says that we might ask ourselves a question about what it is to be indoctrinated from birth to hate somebody, and that the dangers of extremism in any context, the dangers of even extremism in the sake of a holy principle, can become itself distorted, and the Nazarite, can become a distortion, and that's always the danger of zealousness. And there's a certain zealousness involved in this entire institution, where someone becomes so orthodox about, even in abstinence, people who saying, I'll never drink, and then they begin to say that drinking is like there's a way that extreme positions then lead also to a kind of judgmental attitude and a way of, and you become very distant from the world and not connected to it in some profound way. I think that's one piece here in this otherwise very, very relatable idea of making a vow when you're troubled by, a certain thing in your life. Say, I'm gonna steer clear of it. I'm gonna go to one extreme so I can come back to the center. Is not altogether uncommon and unhealthy, maybe. So that, and then I'll show you this one last. You know what? Enough. There's a lot in here. I want to hear people, and we'll come back to this if we have time. So we're going to take comments and questions in the room, and then we'll go into the Zoom. So we'll start with Batya, Nikki, Thomas, and Wendy. Go ahead, Batya.
So he's being made next to God. As a matter of fact, in Leviticus 21, Hashem says to Moses, "Speak to the priests and the sons of Aaron, and say to them, none shall defile himself for any dead person among his kin. So he's being made so holy.
He's making himself very holy.
Even holier than the priest.
Not holier, but like the priest, holy like the priest, yeah.
Holier than them.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, what's interesting, I think, is that, I agree with you, and what's remarkable, again, just to take a step back, is that any person could do this. That's what's most radical about this, is that for someone to come along and say, you know, I'm gonna be a priest, a high priest now for a month, is a pretty democratic and remarkably egalitarian way to approach, like, what is ostensibly a hereditary position, right? You know, even though, I mean, I bought into it, but my father was already a priest, but I had to buy originally.
Right, very Gevuridic.
It's very, it's
strongly Gevurid, like,
making strong boundaries.
right.
The
So
Torah's
that-
desire is to meet people's desire for a higher level of holiness, and they might not be able to maintain it for that long, but they're given a structure. There's a system that allows them to upgrade to, you know, from the regular subscription to the pro.
And anyone that is really thinking about it realizes that he's being made, the Nazarite is being made so holy next to God, you know, like,
Which is a good thing.
yeah, to make it a good thing,
It's a good thing,
right?
I think. Okay, Nikki.
There's two questions. What about sexual intercourse?
That's always the question that everybody, that's like, I mean, that was the elephant in the room. I was like, I was about to get there. So it doesn't explicitly say anything about sexual intercourse, but it's presumed, right, that, but actually, if you look at the sources, one of the reasons that the wine piece was given is as a danger. You know, again, wine leading to licentiousness is kind of a typical trope in the Bible. I'm not altogether sure that it's not a typical trope in human history, and life. You know, nichnas yain, when we, you know, being drunk is, you know, presumably, the Nazir is only, these are the three areas, but there's a presumption on a certain kedusha, certain holiness vis-a-vis relationships with one's spouse, but there is no monastic tradition in quite that way in Judaism, right? There is still a chiyuv, an obligation, even though there may be a few people, but no one was ever fully abstinent, one person in the Gemara, but for the most part, Jewish monastics still engage in Dr. Ruth kind things, which is wonderful. And what was your second question?
And the second question is, what's this business with the hair? Is that to make him more humble because he looks repugnant? What is this preoccupation with hair in most religions?
Yeah.
You know, it's very puzzling.
Is it?
Yes. To me,
Yeah, so I think that classically, if you look at like classic mythology and you look at various mythologists who've studied like world religions, and there are two ways to go with hair. Hair is either shorn in certain traditions because hair is seen as that which entangles us, like when you know, in the Buddhist tradition, to have long hair is to be in a sense setting oneself up for entanglements and attachments. And so when the shearing of the hair is a kind of saying, I am released from entanglements, the entanglements of family and so on, and those kinds of earthly responsibilities. But even in that tradition, it's clear that the hair represents something that could be potentially, it's alive, it grows, it's visibly connected to something that needs to be tamed, right? Cut, as it were. And there is here the opposite reflection, which is to be holy here, and like in the Sannyasin tradition and so on, is to be released from civilizing elements, right? That the human hand won't shape that which God is actually naturally, organically growing. And there's also a really profound, as those know stories, you know, there's a deep connection to sexuality and to the life force and to eros that is in the hair, for all kinds of obvious reasons, and then not always so obvious. And so I just want to say one last piece with the hair that you picked up. This piece of Torah is coming directly after a part of the Torah that I kind of assiduously wanted to avoid this morning, which is, almost every year I kind of want to avoid it, just talking about it. It deserves like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a week to talk about the adulterous, the adulterous woman scene in the Torah called Sotah. And in that story, in those laws, the woman's hair is the same word is used. It's uncovered and there's something remarkably radically connecting between the hair of the Nazarite being wild and untamed, and the hair of the adulteress also, that connects them in ways that are suggestive that the woman is the holy one in that story, if you work in that direction. And that, I'll just stop there, there's a lot more in that, but I want to stop there. Anyway, so I think just to honor the four people I called out, so then it was Thomas, Wendy, and then the Zoom, and I'll come back to you, Elliot. Okay, go ahead, Thomas.
Very briefly, like, is someone coming from Catholicism, which Samuel Klein told me to think of as a radically successful, heretical Jewish sect?
Nice, thank you.
And always to hold that, like, this is the most Catholic thing I've ever read in a Jewish text, because of the way that it valorizes not so much vowing, but disavowal, refusal, negation of the sensual life
Of the sensual life.
and of the body, and this refusal of the body, which some people see in the ultimate expression of in the crucifixion, the passion, the affliction of the body. But the aesthetic tradition, the withdrawal, like denying all of these human functions. And interestingly, in pre-Reconquista Spain, this bodily affliction in Catholicism is very, very much even the most active way that the religion is publicly practiced. And so I wonder if it informed those thinking. And then just as a question, I'm really curious about, conversely, the source of that tradition that would be held to account for the pleasures he didn't take.
Yeah, it's in early Midrashim, and in the Talmud, and then the Midrash, that God, the Midrash actually says that God took the first human and brought and elevated them and looked over all of creation and said to them, be careful that you take care of my creation, right? That you have to, it's given to you, but make sure that you watch over it. And in the Midrash specifically on this, the phrase is, Al kol davar shv'davar she'ra'u einecha, that everything that your eyes saw, in the future you'll have to give an accounting, a full accounting for everything that you saw that you didn't want to consecrate and make holy. And so there is a tension in here, and I would say two things to what Tomas just said very beautifully, is that, if you read scholars like Daniel Boyarin, I was just in the middle of one of his books about the Jewish Gospels, the polemical side of Judaism during the time when Christians were either murdering us for not being willing to become Christians, or even earlier than that, when Jews were fighting for market share amongst other Jews to make sure that the rabbinic Pharisaic tradition was the one that won out. It's really clear that many things that we consider to be Christian ideas now were completely not that, they weren't even heretical to Jews who were living at the time when Jesus lived, and that many of the ideas that later became slightly, changed or embellished or amplified were already existent. The idea of that God could incarnate is certainly a part of. I know it's so crazy for a yeshiva kid to hear these things, but if you read so much of literature around the time of the Second Temple and then later on, the people who were expecting the Messiah had good reason to imagine that the person would have some of those qualities and traits. And the question, of course, was whether or not Jesus was that one or not. That's a legitimate question that they had in their worldview. So it shouldn't surprise us that there are many of the things that later became expressed in a very particular way within Christianity, and especially in Catholicism, have roots also in Jewish life too. And there is mutual influence, of course. The scholar Arthur Green talked about the cult of Mary in the 13th century, in the 12th and 13th century, that influenced the writing of the Zohar and its emphasis on the Divine Mother, the Shekhinah coming out of the cult of Mary, and so on. So, yeah, it's there. And I just want to say that if I could do a whole course on some of the most shocking ascetic texts in Jewish life, the Reishis Chochmah, Eliyahu Dividas in the 1500s and the 16th century in northern Israel, Tzfat, like the Hasidic tradition is usually the one that's seen as the one that made harmony between body and soul, between matter and spirit. But even within the Hasidic tradition, there were incredibly ascetic tendencies to it. It's not foreign to us whatsoever. And I think that this struggle towards a non-dual Judaism is an ongoing struggle towards our relationship that all religious traditions have towards the pleasures of the body and the visible world and the tasteable world, that. So it's there too, it's in us too, it's there. Wendy, thanks Thomas. Wendy.
Okay, I think Nachmanides was basically reiterating the conclusion of the Chachamim in the Talmud, who basically said the same thing, that long term, you should not separate yourself. Unlike the Christian and Buddhist monks who lifetime separate themselves, the Chachamim of the Talmud did not think that was a good idea. And hence, the only really long-term known Nazir was Shimshon. And that it was important for the people to be of this world and not to separate themselves. And that's why it was okay to be a Nazirite for a limited amount of time, but unlike the Christian and Buddhist monks, not lifelong.
Right. So I just wanted to just say that I think that the Ramban believed, he wrote it explicitly, we just read it, that the Torah demands that you bring a sin offering because you should have stayed a Nazirite your whole life, right? The Ramban says it explicitly. But what I think you're saying is that the Torah doesn't really allow for that. So, in other words, it's a kind of interesting ambivalence. The Torah is almost acknowledging that its own aspirational ideal is something that it's also, mandating against. And so you bring the Korban Chatat as if to say, there's something innately beautiful about wanting to be a Nazirite your whole life, but there's also something practically that the Torah says, no, one should be in the world in that way, and that maybe periods of abstinence for a certain amount of time. But I think it's also just fascinating just to think of the extreme nature of any abstinence that the Torah is warning against. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have a tendency, and I've seen in other people, when we say no to something in our own lives and we do it for reasons that are to us very clear that it's a positive in our lives, it's very hard to keep that individual predilection or that individual choice to ourselves. I think I've been around people who are vegans and it's very, very difficult. And they're very holy. They're very holy people, and they have a kind of, I'm not saying everyone, not every vegan, I'm saying, but I noticed it, it's not just vegan, it's if someone says, gluten's not good for you, and the next thing you know, you're sitting at a table. My brother at this wedding the other night, he hasn't eaten gluten in 8 years, my twin brother, so I'm reaching for the roll, and he slapped my hand. I looked at him, I said, what are you doing? He says, you don't need that. I said, I want it. He said, it's mine. I was like, okay. I mean, it's very hard. It's very hard, it's like the latest, the greatest fad, or and there's a kind of evangelical quality to people who are well-meaning and want what works for them to then work for you. And so it's a kind of wildly, dangerous notion at this, while it also is, it's kind of complicated because sometimes when I see, when New York State was going to outlaw those big sodas, right? The big gulps, and I understood both sides of the argument. On the one hand, liberties and what's the end of that? You start saying we can't have, then the wrong people become the government officials. Now I can't have a guitar because I have to have the Fender guitar. It's I get it. It's a slippery slope argument. At the same time, I thought to myself, is there any doubt whatsoever that is like smoking a cigarette? And cigarette's a great example. It's we should outlaw cigarettes, but they're like, no. And so I understand both sides of this, the danger of it, but I also recognize the need for it. But before I go back to Batya, we have so many amazing people who have been waiting patiently in the Zoom, and they're also in the room. So let's get Beth, Paul, and go ahead, Beth, and then Paul. I saw you, my sweet friend. Don't worry. Go ahead, Beth.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I wanted, since we've been kind of focusing on Nazarism and alcoholism, I wanted to share a couple of facts about the US population. I live in the United States. I know some of the people here don't. But in the United States, we have something like 330 some million people. And of that population, about 38 million are either actively alcoholics or they're susceptible in some way to alcohol use disorder. So that's roughly 10% of the population. That's pretty significant. And then we referred earlier to LGBTQ. That population is something like 4 times more susceptible, probably because of stress in their life. So I just wanted to throw those out there as things to digest, that perhaps Nazarism is pretty useful for a significant chunk of the population. But the main thing I wanted to talk about was to go back to what Daniel brought up, which has to do with another kind of vow, which is probably much more common than Nazarite vows, and that is marriage vows and the time-bound nature of them. We know that a marriage vow ends with the death of one of the spouses, that's for sure. And then it can also end with an agreed upon divorce. And when Rabbi Ingber brought up Kol Nidre, it really caught my ear, because never during Kol Nidre have I ever released myself from my marriage vows back when I was still married. And conversely, when I was still married, my former spouse and I would go out on our anniversary. And one thing I'd say to him, this is back when we were getting along, I'd say to him kind of cutely, hey, do you want to still stay married? You know, we'd be out for dinner for our anniversary. And he'd say, yeah. And I'd say, okay, me too. So let's stay married. Until we didn't. And it's really interesting to think about the time-bound nature of a vow and how Kol Nidre may or may not play into the various vows we've made. I certainly didn't nullify my marriage vow ever on Kol Nidre. I did later. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out there. Tibarti.
Yeah, Shemati, I mean, I gave a sermon many years ago on Kol Nidre called Promisa Ergo Sum. We promise, therefore we are. And promises are an implicit belief in a future, right? You know, not whether, like, it already affirms a future, right? Like, we don't make promises if we don't have some hope of fulfilling it. And to not make a promise is also to be resigned at some level. And so there's something beautiful about Neder and Yom Kippur and death. I mean, the whole structure of a Jewish wedding ceremony is not actually based on a Neder. It's a different legal structure, and that's why there's never been an issue with Kol Nidre, and also because Kol Nidre actually doesn't work anyway as a legal structure, which has been the bane of most rabbis around the time that it was introduced, because it was essentially, you know, there's no public proclamation that annuls a vow in any way like that. There has to be a tribunal and so on. Anyway, so anyway, that's just the particulars. But like, I love that you brought it back to what Daniel said about the general question of the time-bound nature of a promise, or the limits of our promises, which is a beautiful thing to think about. Okay, Paul, and then we have to come in, and then we'll come back. I have one more text to add, and then Paul, go ahead.
To me, the time boundness of this section in the Torah is interesting, because the comparison to me is with the covenant, which isn't a vow and isn't time bound. It's incumbent upon all Jews. And I think the reason why this is here is an acknowledgement that the covenant is very difficult and we need practice. And that the Nazarite vow is a codified way of us practicing being lifetime adherence to a practice. And they've chosen wine and hair because it's difficult. And the covenant, the Torah is acknowledging that the covenant is very, very difficult and we need practice. And we are given this time boundness as a way of experiencing the difficulty, and perhaps of experiencing the joy of accomplishing something that is hard. But and now it's interesting that the end of this period is with a sin offering, and perhaps it's an acknowledgement of maybe it did, probably you weren't successful, or that it's, as you can going to continue to need practice. And the sin offering is an acknowledgement of that. I'm not entirely sure, but the key here is this.
Yeah, but why not, let's go with what you're saying, Paul, let's go somewhere else, I mean, if you don't mind, like, in this kind of like jam. So, yeah, I was thinking as you were speaking about, because you abstracted it slightly to something about, almost about dedication, about discipline, essentially what you were saying was discipline and dedication, and we can do hard things, it's a great podcast, my wife listens to.
I love that one.
We can do hard things, so Torah is saying we can do hard things. Covenant is hard. Hair growing is hard. Not eating, not wine, being a vegan, becoming an Olympic athlete, being a human being, whatever you want to call it. Every project in life requires a certain degree of commitment and dedication and a willingness to persist and persevere and so on, all those things. Might it also be possible to say, and I was just thinking a lot about this morning, that every project that we have undertaken in our lives that required a concentrated period of focus and discipline and abstinence and saying no has attendant consequences that are built in. They're unintended, but they are necessary as part of that project, but they are hurtful. No one has ever started a business and put in those number of hours without in some way abstaining not only from going out with friends, but also hanging out probably with their loved ones. Like no one has ever had a period of intense focus that doesn't have attendant removal, not only from those things that one is abstained from, but also removal from other areas of your life that now can't be, one can't be attuned to those things, right? It's almost impossible. And maybe the chatat offering, maybe the sin offering is an acknowledgement that every pious individual, no matter what their piety is, has committed some sin in some sense proportionate to their ability to achieve that piety, right? It's almost part and parcel. You want to become a saint, you're going to also have to, disappoint a lot of people that were hoping that you were going to show up. And, it's just an intense thing to think about that, I often, when I thought about, I used to think about, I was very interested and read quite a bit about Obama, let's say, as his rise to become Obama. And right at each stage, he made a great impact in various parts of the world that he was working in, like community organizer, but he had to say goodbye because he had something bigger calling him. And I can imagine that he had to offer a sin offering to the communities in Chicago that he had to leave behind because they wanted to stay. He was a great community organizer. And then when he was a senator, he had to say, you know what? I know you sent me to the center to focus on this, but I got a bigger thing that's calling me. And there's a kind of, I love this kind of ambivalence of the Torah. Like, yeah, we're giving you room to be a Nazir, but don't think you're going to get away with it scot clean. You're going to have to offer a korban chatat. You're going to have to bring a sin offering at the end of it because you abstained, you dedicated, it's part of the covenant. But there's something. I mean, and I might be where you were going, Paul, but it certainly triggered something in my head about the pitfalls of these practices. So you can see there are a lot more. It's 9:49, and I have to abstain and say, no, I know, what can I do? It's only so much time. We have to have a 3-hour open book, right? And I know I have to say no to some people. I just wanted to, I wanted to say that, I don't know, some of you, there was, we're gonna end the open book, but I know that I wasn't here last week, and I haven't been around a couple weeks in the open book, but I know that this came up a little bit like the email that was sent out about July and about Romemu in July, and I just want to say two things. One is, the only thing written in stone were the tablets, and they broke too. So, we're trying our best to figure something out. This is an ongoing project. It's a new reality. It's a hybrid. We want desperately for people to be able to engage in Torah study, but we also desperately want people to be upstairs in the shul. And we want to honor people's need for community. There's a robust online community that loves one another, and and it's all great. And we're gonna, it's iterative. And if we overreach in one way, we'll correct like the Nazir in the other direction. We're gonna figure it out. And that's also true with the July. The reason why we said we were going to be closed for July for Shabbat was because we need a break. And we don't have a robust enough lay leadership team to keep Shabbat going without the clergy at this point. Or maybe we do. And maybe that's what we needed to hear from the community is that, hey, I'll lead services or I'll lead services. I know Wendy, I know Tony, we have people. But generally, the community should hear that as not as what about us, but should hear it as we have not taken a break for 17 years, and we're never ahead when we start the year. We were trying our best to say, Ingber's going to be away for 2 weeks in July. I'm going to be in Eretz Yisrael. And Diane, Rabbi Kolaris, has been working, exhaustively. We have a new person coming on as our music person, Shimon Smith. We thought it would be a great time. July is usually much lighter in this community just by looking at the numbers of attendance, and we've looked at the numbers. And it's true. You might be a member and say, wait, I needed to go on a Friday night. That's true. And we heard from a number of people over the weekends who said, had Roman not been there for me when my parents passed away or something like that during July, and I needed to come for a minyan, we heard it. We're taking it in. We're going to think about it. We're going to go back to the community and talk to you guys in the community about our decisions and maybe change them if we made a mistake and course correct. Just wanted to be just transparency's sake. That was our kavanah. That was our kavanah. Our kavanah was we want to get ahead next year, and in order to get ahead, we need a break. And no matter what people say here, there are other people who are not here whose voices, there's a lot of voice in the community. So we heard from people who said, great, but don't, Shabbat, and that's true.
You could go to other synagogues.
I agree with you. That's generally how I used to speak in Roma. When Roma was at its height, it's not exactly where it was in that way, but you guys are all here. It's beautiful still. But when we were like flying, we used to have people who used to come and say, it's nothing like Romemu.
No.
And no. And I'd say, Nikki, first of all, that's nice, but go to another shul. Because if Romemu succeeds in making people love Romemu but not loving Judaism, then we failed.
Yeah.
People should come to love Romemu because they love the service, or they love what the different rabbis say, or what the type of studies. One woman last night said she comes to Romemu. She was looking for a little bit less traditional but more meditative community, and it was like that was it. That's us. But Judaism, Shabbat happens in other communities too, and thank God if you live anywhere near Romemu or even come to Romemu, you're like a stone's throw away from 15 other synagogues, and it's nothing like coming to your own shul. That's beautiful. So anyway, this was a public service announcement to say, Shamanu, we heard about the open book and the shmooze afterwards, and we also heard about the community on Shabbos in the summer, and God willing, like the Nazir, we're going to try to find the right balance here for the sake of holiness in the week ahead. So, good Shabbos to everybody. Thanks, Gil, and thanks to everybody.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos, friends. Good Shabbos.